Hello everyone, bonjour tout le monde. When I look at the bold and concrete ideas in our platform, I couldn't be more proud to be part of this Liberal team, because now is the time to finish the fight against COVID-19 and build an even stronger Canada. When the pandemic hit, Canadians stepped up, and your Liberal government worked hard to deliver results for Canadians. We climbed 3 mountains. In the first mountain, we procured 2.7 billion items of PPE for Canadians, from gloves and gowns to N95s and surgical masks. In the second mountain, we procured 44 million rapid tests for Canadians. And in the third mountain, we secured the most diverse portfolio of vaccines in the world, leading the G7 and the G20 in vaccine administration and making sure we have enough vaccines for all eligible Canadians while contributing to the developing world. And while we were securing these deals, the Conservative Party told Canadians that we wouldn't have vaccines until 2030. Le gouvernement libéral a appuyé les provinces et territoires et s'est assuré que nous avions suffisamment de vaccins pour réaliser la plus grande campagne de vaccination de l'histoire du Canada. Let me make one thing clear. The big, bold vision that we have for our country is only possible if we finish the fight against COVID-19. While some may want to bring more privatization to our healthcare system and don't think that people traveling on planes and trains need to be vaccinated, we have a plan to help more Canadians find a family doctor, cut wait times, and improve the quality of long-term care in this country. That's job number 1. Keeping Canadians safe is job number 1. Nous devons avancer ensemble. Let's move forward together.
COVID-19 has further revealed the fundamental gaps that Indigenous communities face in Canada, and recent events have shone a light on the tragic legacy of colonialism. We must work to address these difficult truths and move forward on the path of reconciliation together. We're committed to walking that shared path, to confront the painful legacy of residential schools, to end long-term drinking water advisories, and tackle systemic racism across the country. We all have a role to play in building a better and fairer country, and the Liberal Party will be there to support that.
For too long, owning a home has seemed out of reach for too many Canadians. We have to change that. That's why we're going to tax the biggest banks to help more Canadians become homeowners. We'll help first-time homebuyers save up to $30,000. We'll help 1.4 million families move into a new home, and we'll ban foreign investors from snatching up homes that young Canadians could be living in. We have a real plan with real solutions.
Si vous n'avez pas de plan pour l'environnement, ça veut dire que vous n'avez pas de plan pour l'avenir de notre économie. Dans cette élection, en tant que Canadien, on doit choisir, soit de revenir en arrière à l'ère de Stephen Harper, ou d'aller de l'avant avec un plan ambitieux en matière de lutte au changement climatique, pour créer de bons emplois, des emplois verts dans nos communautés, pour que nos enfants et nos petits-enfants vivent dans un environnement sain, avec de l'air et de l'eau propres. Choisissons d'avancer ensemble.
We know that we can't build a better future without supporting young Canadians. That's why we've been creating new jobs and career opportunities for youth since 2015. But we need to do more and move forward to give them a better start. That's why we'll eliminate interest on student loans, offer more support for repaying those loans, and invest in mental health support for students at colleges and universities across Canada. Young Canadians are the leaders of today, and we have to be there to help them succeed.
Les armes à feu n'ont pas de place dans nos rues. Il en va de la sécurité de tout le monde. On a déjà banni les armes d'assaut. On veut encore aller plus loin en offrant 1 milliard de dollars aux provinces et territoires qui sont prêtes à bannir les armes de poing. Mais Aaron O'Toole, il cancellerait tout ça. Il travaille main dans la main avec le lobby des armes à feu. Les conservateurs veulent nous ramener en arrière. Nous, on veut renforcer le contrôle des armes à feu.
Salut, ici Mona Fortier, la candidate libérale d'Ottawa-Vanier et la coprésidente de la plateforme libérale. Lorsque nous avons commencé à élaborer le programme du Parti libéral du Canada, nous avions une chose en tête, vous. Notre objectif avec cette plateforme et chaque plateforme au budget que nous avons présenté aux Canadiens depuis 2015, c'est d'aider les Canadiens, rendre la vie plus abordable pour vous et votre famille, lutter contre les changements climatiques, créer des emplois et faire croître la classe moyenne. Et depuis 2015, nous avons fait énormément de progrès. Notre plan a mis plus d'argent dans les poches de 9 parents sur 10 grâce à la prestation canadienne pour enfants et a permis de sortir 400 000 enfants de la pauvreté. Il n'est plus possible de polluer librement au Canada et nous avons réduit les impôts de la classe moyenne et augmenté ceux du 1% des plus riches. Mais il nous reste encore beaucoup à faire pour aider les Canadiens à relever les défis auxquels nous devons faire face. Nous ne pouvons pas laisser le Canada reculer. Nous avons fait trop de chemin pour nous arrêter maintenant. On doit continuer d'avancer ensemble.
I'm Terry Duguid, Liberal candidate for Winnipeg South and the Liberal Platform co-chair with Mona. Our platform stays true to those core values, but it also tackles the challenges Canadians face today. Our plan starts with finishing the fight against COVID-19 and getting the job done on vaccines so that all Canadians can stay safe and healthy. It also means having a real plan to build a better Canada for everyone. And that's why we're making $10 a day childcare a reality everywhere, why we're going to create green new jobs and create a cleaner future, and why we're helping more Canadians have a home of their own. Our plan will move Canada forward, it will build a better country for everyone, and will guide us as we stay focused on what matters most, you. Now I'm happy to introduce our candidate for University Rosedale, Chrystia Freeland.
Merci tout le monde. C'est un très grand plaisir d'être ici aujourd'hui. Je tiens à reconnaître que nous sommes sur le territoire traditionnel des peuples Mississauga du Credit, Anishinaabe, Chippewa, Haudenosaunee et Wendat. Les Canadiens nous ont élus en 2015 avec un mandat clair: soutenir la classe moyenne et rendre la vie plus abordable pour tout le monde. Et c'est ce que nous avons fait. Nous avons sorti 435 000 enfants de la pauvreté. Nous avons baissé l'âge de la retraite de 67 à 65 ans et nous avons augmenté les impôts des personnes les plus riches. And then, when we were re-elected in 2019, no one knew that Canada was about to face our toughest test since the Second World War. But when the global pandemic reached our shores, we stayed true to our core conviction, just as we did during the NAFTA negotiations with Donald Trump, that Canada is best, that Canada is strongest when we work together, when we're there for each other. We knew that the only way forward was to provide unprecedented support for Canadians and Canadian businesses. Canadian workers and Canadian families got through these difficult months with help from the CERB, the CRB, and an expanded EI safety net. Canadian businesses staved off bankruptcy, thanks to their own resilience, of course, but also thanks to the wage subsidy, the rent subsidy, and CEBA loans. Toutefois, nous sommes conscients que la lutte contre la COVID n'est pas encore terminée. Les secteurs les plus durement touchés, comme le tourisme, l'hôtellerie, les arts et la culture, ne peuvent toujours pas réouvrir complètement. C'est pourquoi nous leur apportons encore plus de soutien ciblé pour les aider à passer à travers les prochains mois. Et nous comprenons que c'est un grand défi réouvrir une entreprise après plus d'un an de confinement et d'interruption. Et c'est pourquoi nous offrons un soutien additionnel aux entreprises, par l'entremise du programme d'embauche pour les inciter à embaucher. Et nous avons élargi l'allocation canadienne pour les travailleurs pour sortir plus de travailleurs de la pauvreté. We're providing this support because it's the compassionate thing to do, of course. But you know what? It is also economically the smart thing to do. Our government's bold action during the pandemic helped prevent what economists call economic scarring. And that has preserved our country's economic muscle and will help us all to come roaring back. Aujourd'hui, il est notre devoir d'apprendre les leçons de la pandémie et de bâtir une économie canadienne plus résiliente. C'est pourquoi un de nos engagements fondamentaux est de créer un système d'apprentissage et de garde d'enfants abordable, accessible et de haute qualité. For more than 50 years, for more than half a century, Canadian women have been fighting for early learning and childcare as an essential feminist policy. The COVID recession has shown once and for all that it is also an essential economic policy. Without childcare, parents, and let's be honest, mothers, can't work. The closing of our schools and daycares during the COVID lockdowns drove women's participation in the labor force down to its lowest level in more than 2 decades. That's why we are investing $30 billion to build a Canada-wide, high-quality, affordable, and accessible early learning and childcare system. And let me tell you something. This is not just a paper promise. We have already rolled up our sleeves, we have already gotten to work, and we are getting the job done. To date, we have signed childcare agreements with 8 provinces and territories. Thanks to these deals alone, nearly half of Canadian children will have access to high-quality care for just $10 a day within 5 years or less. These deals will be great for Canadian children. They will be great for Canadian women. And they will turbocharge the Canadian economy. Et c'est un fait économique. Regardez le Québec. Les services de garde ont augmenté son PIB provincial d'1,7%. A publicly funded, Canada-wide early learning and childcare system will deliver that same robust growth for all Canadians. But Erin O'Toole's Conservatives have said emphatically that they will rip up these historic agreements, just like Stephen Harper did. That would be a step backwards for Canadian children, a step backwards for Canadian women, and a step backwards for the Canadian economy. We cannot let that happen. Unlike the Conservatives, our party has a real plan for the future. A plan that creates jobs and growth for everyone. Et alors, je suis vraiment heureuse d'accueillir maintenant notre chef, Justin Trudeau, qui présentera notre plan pour continuer de faire avancer le Canada.
Merci, Christian. Bonjour tout le monde. It's great to be back in Toronto and joined virtually by our extraordinary team members from right across the country. And thank you, Christian. As Deputy Prime Minister, you've been relentless in standing up for families, workers, and for all Canadians. As Finance Minister and the first woman to hold the post, you've met a historic moment with a historic plan on everything from childcare to middle-class jobs. On a passé beaucoup d'heures tous les deux au téléphone avec les premiers ministres des provinces et territoires pour se mobiliser contre la COVID-19. Alors, je suis très enthousiaste quand je pense à tout ce qu'on peut continuer d'accomplir ensemble. Merci, mon ami. In the last 18 months, our country has faced the crisis of a century. It's been tough, tougher than anyone could have expected. But we've faced it together. Dès le premier jour, on vous a dit qu'on allait être là pour vous. Et c'est exactement ce qu'on a fait. La PCU vous a aidé à nourrir votre famille. La subvention salariale vous a permis de garder vos employés. Les prêts pour les petites entreprises vous ont aidé à traverser la tempête et ça a donné des résultats. Le Canada a réussi à surmonter cette épreuve mieux que presque tous les autres pays du monde. On a réussi à faire ça ensemble. Et pendant qu'on lutte pour en finir avec la pandémie une bonne fois pour toutes, il est temps de choisir la suite pour notre pays. In this election, you have a choice about what the next 18 months and the next 18 years look like. And that's what I want to talk to you about today. Because we have a plan to move forward for everyone on health, on housing, on childcare, on climate. So here's what our plan looks like. Keeping you safe and healthy is job one. It has always been and always will be. That's why we'll make sure you can find a family doctor or a family health team. And while we're at it, we'll make a historic, dedicated investment in mental health care, too. Because mental health is health. And it's time it was treated that way. Et tout ça, c'est seulement une partie de ce qu'on va faire en santé. Mais on va aussi en faire plus en matière de logement. Parce qu'il y a trop de gens qui se demandent s'ils pourront un jour se permettre d'acheter une maison ou simplement s'ils pourront se trouver un chez-soi. On va vous aider à devenir propriétaire plus tôt. D'abord, on va vous aider à épargner pour une mise de fonds plus rapidement. On va aussi s'attaquer aux requins de l'immobilier, combattre la surenchère et mettre un frein aux fortunes étrangères qui viennent acheter des maisons ici sans les habiter. And once you have a home and you've settled in, well, maybe you want to start a family. Well, we've got your back there, too. We'll keep fighting for $10 a day childcare. That means defending the 8 deals we've already signed while working with provinces and territories that still need to come on board. Et on pense aussi à l'avenir de nos enfants et nos petits-enfants. Mes amis, on a un plan ambitieux pour réduire la pollution et créer plus d'emplois. On va investir dans les industries propres et rendre notre réseau électrique carboneutre d'ici 2035. Et pendant qu'on fait tout ça, on va rester fidèle à nos valeurs. On va défendre la diversité. On va avancer sur la voie commune de la réconciliation et on va bâtir un meilleur Canada pour tous. That's our plan to move forward. And of course, it all starts with finishing the fight against COVID-19 for good. Over the last little while, you've probably seen the disturbing anger of anti-vaxxers and anti-maskers. You might have seen them marching downtown against local businesses that are following public health rules, or yelling at a grocery store clerk or a server at your local diner, or even threatening people at one of our rallies. Vous avez probablement aussi vu le manque de clarté franchement inquiétant de certains chefs politiques, et oui, je parle d'Aaron O'Toole et d'Yves-François Blanchet, qui semblent vouloir justifier les anti-vaccins parce qu'après tout, c'est leur choix. Let's be clear. It's your freedom I'm focused on. The freedom of the responsible majority of us who are fully vaccinated. The freedom of our children under 12 who can't yet get their shots. Because that's what's at stake. And I will always stand up for your right to be safe, to be in places that are free from COVID-19, your right to not be forced back into lockdown. So we'll stand firm on our commitment that federal public servants should be vaccinated. We'll make sure everyone on your plane or train is vaccinated. We'll protect businesses that mandate vaccinations from unjustified lawsuits, and we'll pay for the rollout of proof of vaccination programs for every province and territory that steps up. Depuis les 18 derniers mois, la grande majorité des Canadiens ont fait les bons choix. Vous avez porté un masque. Vous vous êtes aidés les uns les autres parce que vous saviez que c'était la chose à faire. Chacun, à votre manière, vous avez été des héros. Et maintenant, je vous comprends quand vous dites que vous voulez qu'on en finisse avec la pandémie. Et c'est exactement ce qu'on va faire. Pour vous, pour votre famille et pour les enfants comme Betty, qui a 9 ans. I met Betty a few weeks ago in Regina. She's 9 years old and had written to me last year asking to make sure her grandparents got vaccinated. You know what? They did. And so did millions of other people. And now Canada is leading the world. So if you haven't gotten vaccinated yet, make sure you don't get left behind. Do it for Betty and kids like her. And do it because that's how we'll beat this pandemic for good. That's how we'll get to a brighter future for everyone. Because, my friends, that's what's waiting for us just around the bend. And I know you see that. In the last 2.5 weeks, I've been traveling across the country, from Markham to Longueuil, from Victoria to Halifax, in the north, out west, and across the prairies. And everywhere I've gone, no matter who I've talked to, there's something I've always found. Hope. Hope in our future. Hope in each other. And the unshakable hope that together we can build a better Canada for everyone. Together, we've come so far. Together, we can go so much further. Mes amis, chaque décision compte. Ça compte pour les parents et les enfants à l'école de savoir qu'on se tient debout pour défendre la vaccination. Ça compte pour les patients qui cherchent un médecin ou qui attendent une chirurgie, qu'on va se battre pour garder un système de santé public et universel. Ça compte pour les générations futures de réduire la pollution et atteindre la carboneutralité. Ces décisions-là comptent vraiment. Et pour être bien franc, quand Aaron O'Toole n'est même pas capable de dire à ses candidats de se faire vacciner, on voit bien qu'il ne comprend pas ce que ça veut dire d'avoir du leadership. What Aaron O'Toole is doing is not leadership. Courting special interests, from anti-vaxxers to climate deniers, from the gun lobby to anti-choice organizations, failing to mention racism even once in his platform, and ripping up $10 a day childcare agreements across the country, none of that is leadership. And that's why this election matters. That's why having a real, positive plan and being ready to actually deliver on it matters. So let's talk about that instead. Parlons d'à quel point c'est important d'avoir des places en garderie à 10 $ ou moins pour nos enfants, mais aussi pour s'assurer que les parents, et en particulier les mères, puissent réussir. D'ailleurs, on sait que ce qui est bon pour les familles, c'est aussi bon pour l'économie. Parlons de ce que ça représente de pouvoir s'acheter une première maison. Parlons d'en finir avec l'itinérance et de s'assurer que tout le monde ait un chez-soi pour transformer des vies et des communautés. And let's talk about what real action on climate change means. Clean air for today and tomorrow. Good jobs for years to come. Canada succeeding in a world where competition is increasingly green. I want to speak for a moment to all the young people voting for the first time in this election. You've reminded me that you don't even really remember what the Stephen Harper era was like. Instead, you see all that we've done in the past years on climate, just like on reconciliation, on fighting systemic racism and discrimination, as just the baseline. And there's no doubt that we've made real, important change. But I hear you when you say that we need to move even faster. I hear you, and I agree. Yes, We're in a crisis, and no, half measures won't do. And going backward, that isn't even an option. Because you want ambition, you deserve ambition, just like Betty deserves a bold plan for her future. And that's exactly what we're ready to deliver. And let me tell you something else about Betty. She told me that she wants, one day, to be Prime Minister. Since she's in elementary school, it'll be a few years still. And that means we have a few years to get this right by the time she's ready to lead on the challenges of the future. So let's finish this hard work now. Fight climate change, stand up to systemic racism, walk the path of reconciliation, and to do all that and more, end this pandemic once and for all. My friends, these are not small goals. But during this pandemic, we've learned all that Canadians can do when up against a challenge. We've been an example to the world. Chaque fois que vous faisiez face à un obstacle, et il y en a eu beaucoup dans les derniers mois, vous avez tenu le coup. Vous avez gardé espoir. C'est toute cette résilience et cette bienveillance qu'on a mis dans notre plan ambitieux pour l'avenir. Et ce plan, il faut le mettre en marche. Pas dans 1 an, pas dans 2 ans. Il faut le mettre en marche dès maintenant. Et pour y arriver, ça prend une équipe qui rassemble tout ce qu'il y a de meilleur à travers le pays. Our Liberal team has done so much over the past 6 years. Just think of what we can accomplish if we have even more extraordinary Canadians joining in. So make your voice heard. Maybe that means reaching out to your great local Liberal candidate to tell them you stand with them. Maybe that means you go knock doors or make phone calls. But above all, make sure to vote. Make sure to choose the future you want. Together, we can measure up to the belief you have in this country, in each other. My friends, I'm ready if you are. I'm ready for the hard work. I'm ready for hope. I'm ready to move forward for everyone. Merci. Bonjour tout le monde, heureux de prendre vos questions.
Deux questions pour une durée de 30 minutes, une question et une sous-question. Mr. Trudeau will answer questions for 30 minutes, one question, one follow-up, starting with the Canadian press.
Good morning. The platform you've presented this morning, it lays out $78 billion in spending over 5 years, which is about 3 times the expected new revenues. So is this something that Canada can actually afford, and when will the budget be balanced? Oh, in both official languages, please.
We went into this pandemic with one of the best fiscal positions of all our peer countries, and we're still in one of the best fiscal positions, even with all the investments we've made in Canadians, partially because of all the investments we've made in Canadians. What we're seeing, yes, with this ambitious and detailed and responsible and concrete platform is a debt to GDP ratio, a proportion of our debt as a relation to the size of the economy, decreasing even faster than we had predicted only a few months ago in Budget 2021. This is the plan that is going to bring Canadians forward to end this pandemic, to invest in growth as we fight climate change and create jobs, to make sure we're giving women the opportunity to get back into the workforce by ensuring $10 a day childcare right across the country, to help Canadians buy their first home, and to make sure we're investing in family doctors, in mental health care, in supports for seniors, by massive investments in health care as well. This is the plan that Canada needs to be even more ambitious, to draw all that we've learned on in fighting this crisis of COVID, to apply it to the crisis of climate change, of housing, of health care, of childcare. These are the things that allow Canada to move forward, and that's the choice I'm putting forward to Canadians right now. Le Canada est entré dans cette crise de la COVID avec une des meilleures positions fiscales de tous les pays du G7 et on continue d'avoir une des meilleures positions fiscales de tous nos pays pairs. On voit que même avec les investissements ambitieux qu'on est en train de mettre de l'avant pour les Canadiens, notre dette comme proportion de la taille de notre économie continue à diminuer encore plus rapidement que ce qu'on avait prévu il y a quelques mois. C'est un plan responsable et prudent tout en étant extrêmement ambitieux parce qu'on sait que la façon de se remettre de cette pandémie et de rebâtir en mieux, c'est en luttant avec énormément d'ambition contre les changements climatiques tout en créant des emplois. C'est en assurant des dizaines de milliers de plus de places en garderie au Québec et 250 000 nouvelles places en garderie à 10 $ par jour à travers le pays. C'est en s'assurant que nos aînés, les besoins en santé mentaux et aussi l'aide pour ceux qui cherchent un médecin de famille, qu'on soit là pour investir et surtout pour aider les gens à trouver un logement, pour contrer ce besoin qu'on a d'établir un chez-soi sécuritaire et fiable pour les années à venir. Oui, c'est un plan ambitieux et c'est un plan qui est à la hauteur des ambitions des Canadiens.
Your government has already cut the health transfers to New Brunswick over abortion clinic charges. So why do you feel the need to change the Canada Health Act to specifically include reproductive health, if not just to politicize this issue even more?
I think it's clear to the vast majority of Canadians that we need to be a country that stands unequivocally for women's rights, for a woman's right to choose. And that's not a theoretical right, it's also a very practical right that involves being able to access reproductive health and services across the country wherever they are. Unfortunately, we've seen some conservative politicians make more difficult access, particularly to vulnerable women who don't have the ability to travel long distances from one city to the next to get the services they need. That's why we are continuing to stand strong in our defense of women's rights, and will continue to ensure that people have access to the reproductive health and services that they need right across the country.
Prochaine question.
Nous savons que c'est essentiel que les femmes à travers le pays aient l'accès aux services reproductifs nécessaires pour qu'elles puissent avoir les choix. Et on sait que ce n'est pas juste un droit théorique, c'est un droit pratique. Les femmes doivent pouvoir accéder à ces services, même si elles sont en situation difficile ou en situation de vulnérabilité. Et pour ça, on va continuer d'exiger, même s'il y a des politiciens conservateurs qui veulent qu'on revienne en arrière dans certaines juridictions à travers le pays, on va continuer d'exiger que les femmes aient un vrai choix de ce qui se passe dans leur vie avec les mesures qu'on met de l'avant.
Next question.
Good morning, Evan Dyer, CBC News. As my colleague just pointed out, your platform proposes to spend $3 over the next 5 years for every dollar in new revenues. You say this will be manageable based on projections of GDP growth. Just yesterday, the projections for Canada's second quarter, which predicted 2.5% growth, proved to be wrong. In fact, Canada's economy shrank. What happens if projections continue to not pan out the way your government hopes they will?
I think there are a number of different ways of looking at how the economy is progressing. Me, I try to focus on people. And when you look at jobs, we've actually recovered 92% of all the jobs we lost during this pandemic. For comparison's sake, the United States has only recovered about 75% of the jobs lost during this pandemic. So this is a responsible and prudent plan that is fair and also completely transparent. You'll see in this platform that we've laid out all the numbers, the biggest promises, all costed by the PBO, so that Canadians can have confidence that this is a real, concrete plan to move forward. None of the other parties have shown their numbers, have shared their costings beyond a few projections that rely on magical thinking like 3% growth through the coming decade every year for Canada, which has only happened once in our history. These are the things that differentiate the proposal we're putting forward for Canadians. It is responsible, it is prudent, and it is fully transparent. The other parties cannot say the same. We stand by our numbers because we know that investing in childcare, investing in better access to housing, investing in better healthcare services, investing in the fight against climate change that also creates good jobs for the future, and doing all that by ending the pandemic as quickly as possible through vaccinations, that's the way forward for this country. That's what Canadians get to choose in this election. Nous savons à quel point c'est important de créer de la croissance économique pour le pays. Et moi, quand je regarde les chiffres, ce que je regarde, c'est souvent les emplois et l'impact dans la vie des gens. Et on a vu que le Canada a repris 92% des emplois qu'on avait perdus pendant cette pandémie. En comparaison, les États-Unis ont repris seulement 75% des emplois perdus pendant la pandémie. Alors, on est sur la bonne voie parce qu'on a été là pour appuyer les petites entreprises, pour appuyer les travailleurs, pour investir dans la recherche et l'innovation. Et c'est exactement ce qu'on va continuer de faire avec un plan responsable, prudent et aussi transparent. On parle de ces chiffres justement parce qu'on les a partagés en détail dans notre plateforme. Et là-dedans, les autres partis ne sont pas en train de partager leurs chiffres, n'ont pas partagé leurs projections, à part de dire avec une pensée magique que l'économie va croître à 3% pour les 10 prochaines années, ce qui n'est jamais passé dans la vie de notre pays. Donc, nous sommes responsables, nous avons un plan concret et très ambitieux, et c'est ce que nous savons que les Canadiens veulent choisir pour l'avenir.
Following up.
You say you'll strip anti-abortion organizations of charitable status, and you've given as an example crisis pregnancy centers. We know that you support a woman's access to abortion, but we also know many Canadians take a different view of that matter. Should Canadians be concerned that you are now using the tax system to target groups that you disagree with politically or ideologically?
There are many Canadians who have different perspectives on a large range of things. Where we take issue is where there are organizations actively working, not just to promote their own views, but to limit the opportunities of women to make their own choices about their body. That is unacceptable in Canada, and that is something I have been clear from the very beginning. I will always defend. Canada is a country where we stand up for women's rights, and I will not allow others to limit those rights while we continue to move forward in a way that supports people from coast to coast to coast.
Prochaine question.
Oui, bonjour, M. Trudeau. Laurence Martin de Radio-Canada. Juste sur un autre sujet complètement, selon un journal chinois, Michael Spavor aurait pris des photos et des vidéos d'équipements militaires chinois pour les fournir à des gens hors du pays. Est-ce qu'on vous a déjà partagé cette information du côté des autorités chinoises? Comment est-ce que vous réagissez à ça?
Tout d'abord, on sait depuis longtemps que la détention de Michael Spavor et de Michael Kovrig était tout à fait arbitraire et en réponse à des préoccupations politiques que la Chine avait par rapport au fonctionnement rigoureux de notre système de justice. Nous allons toujours défendre sans équivoque les droits des deux Michael et exiger qu'ils soient retournés au Canada le plus rapidement possible. On n'a pas confiance dans le système de justice chinois.
Prochaine question.
Vous voulez vous attaquer à la pénurie de main-d'œuvre, mais dans votre plateforme, vous ne proposez pas de mettre un terme plutôt à la PCRE. Pourtant, c'est une mesure qui a été très critiquée par bien des entrepreneurs parce qu'ils disaient que ça exacerbe, je vais y arriver, la pénurie de main-d'œuvre. Votre avis là-dessus?
Tout d'abord, la pénurie de main-d'œuvre existait avant cette pandémie. Oui, elle a été exacerbée par cette pandémie. Mais les gens comprennent à quel point c'est important qu'on soit là pour les gens qui avaient perdu leur emploi à cause de la pandémie. Il y a encore bien des milieux, bien des secteurs, que ce soit les arts et la culture, que ce soit la restauration, le tourisme, où on ne peut pas revenir à ce qu'on avait avant. On ne peut pas encore le faire. Je souligne qu'on a diminué l'aide et les subventions pour ces travailleurs. Maintenant, on est rendu à 300 $ par semaine, ce qui est à peu près 7,50 $ pour un travailleur à temps plein. Alors, je comprends que oui, c'est peut-être un facteur dans certains endroits, mais la pénurie de main-d'œuvre est liée à beaucoup d'autres choses aussi que nous sommes en train d'adresser, que ce soit la mobilité des travailleurs, que ce soit la formation ou que ce soit encore plus d'emphase sur l'immigration, comme le Parti libéral est toujours prêt à faire.
Next question.
David Aiken, Global News. Good morning. You were very quick to remove Scott Andrews, Massimo Paccetti from caucus. You took Ken Harrod of cabinet for some inappropriate behavior, often inappropriate sexual behavior. Why has Raj Saini got a free pass, and why is he still in your caucus? First
of all, we have demonstrated as a government, as a party, as you've said, David, that we are extremely strong on ensuring that everyone has a right to being in a safe workplace. We have improved and increased the processes available within the party, within Parliament, and indeed across the public service and across the country, because no one should be in an unsafe work environment. Everyone should have access to a process to bring their concerns forward. And in this case, Mr. Saini has shared details about the multiple processes that have been gone through over the past many months and the efforts that have been made to demonstrate that we are taking seriously every single concern that is raised.
Well,
nous sommes un parti qui a toujours pris une approche extrêmement ferme sur le droit de quiconque d'être dans un milieu de travail sécuritaire, sans harcèlement. Et nous avons mis en place des processus encore plus robustes pour s'assurer que quiconque émet des préoccupations peut avoir accès à des façons de se faire entendre et de se faire croire. M. Saini a partagé tous les détails des différents processus auxquels on a passé à travers depuis les derniers mois et la dernière année.
With all due respect, the inconsistency is a bit shocking here. and especially considering for military sexual misconduct, what was your response? Military can't investigate the military. Let's have a third party come in. Let's appoint justices. And here you've got Liberals investigating Liberals and just taking people's word. Why not have a third party, an independent process to look at the allegations about the way Mr. Saini has been conducting himself with his employees?
I'm actually happy to correct you there, David, that we always draw on independent processes to follow up on issues that come forward. This is something that Canadians expect. We make sure that there are proper, rigorous processes that everyone gets to go through when they come forward with concerns and allegations.
Prochaine question.
Campbell Clark, the Globe and Mail. Good morning, Mr. Trudeau. Your platform makes no mention of eliminating the deficit or balancing the budget. Aaron O'Toole says that he can balance the budget in 10 years without cuts. So what's your plan to eliminate the deficit?
Well, first of all, let's be very clear that Aaron O'Toole can say whatever he wants. If he doesn't show the numbers, why should Canadians believe him? He's relying on a level of magical thinking that involves 3% growth every single year without, for example, understanding that investing in $10 a day childcare is the best way to get women into the workforce and continue the strong growth that we need as a country. And it's not just women and families and advocacy organizations that are saying that. It's business leaders as well who've recognized through this pandemic how important affordable, accessible, high-quality childcare is, and Aaron O'Toole is promising to rip it up. We are demonstrating that we continue on our responsible choice of investing in things that will grow our economy, investing in the fight against climate change, investing in childcare, because we know that that sets us on a path of growth, and that continues to decrease in a responsible way our deficit and our debt as a proportion of the size of our economy. But you don't just have to take my word for it. I'm happy to turn it over to our extraordinary finance minister, Chrystia Freeland, to follow up on the fiscal responsibleness of this plan. Chrystia.
Thank you. Some of us are not as tall as others. Campbell, did you write a column today about this? Am I remembering correctly? So one thing that you pointed out quite rightly is 10-year fiscal commitments should be greeted with a grain of salt. And I am glad to see people taking that skeptical approach, as they ought to do. And you explained the reasons for that very clearly this morning, so I don't need to repeat that. In this platform, we offer detailed, clear, transparent costings over a 5-year period. That's the standard period used in Canadian budgets, and that's because governments can be held accountable over that period. It's an intentional choice, and I think it's a responsible choice that we've made. As the Prime Minister has already said, this platform that we're putting forward today is based on careful work that we have done with the PBO. The 10 or so major commitments in the platform have been costed by the PBO, and we are going to be transparent about the work that we did there. As the Prime Minister has also said, and let me emphasize, we are clear that a declining debt to GDP ratio is a good thing. It shows responsible fiscal stewardship, something which has been a hallmark of Liberal governments, something that has been a hallmark of Liberal governments since Paul Martin. And I'd like to remind people that after we put forward our budget in April, Standard & Poor's and Moody's reaffirmed Canada's AAA rating. So that is not us grading our homework, that is an external verdict. But the final thing I want to say, and this is really repeating something that the Prime Minister has said, but it does bear repeating, is this is a responsible budget. It's a this is a responsible platform. It is a transparent platform. It is one where we really welcome scrutiny and further questions in the coming days as Canadians have a chance to look at it and digest it. First and foremost, this is a plan for jobs and growth. This is a plan about investing in Canadians, investing in Canadian families for the future. It's an investment in early learning and childcare, which is clearly proven to be a growth driver. It is an investment in the green transition. And again, you know, show me an economist who does not understand and believe that Canada urgently needs to do that. The green transition is a reality in the global economy. And as Canadians, the only choice we have now is, do we want to be ahead of the curve? Do we want to build a green economy so we can continue to sell things to other people? Or do we want to fall behind? And that is no choice at all. And that is why green investments are so important in this budget. And this is an investment in housing. Canada is a growing country, and that is fantastic. We are so lucky to be a country that still believes in welcoming immigrants, that understands that that is a social strength, but also an economic strength. But as a growing country, we need to build homes for our growing country. And in doing that, we make life better, more affordable for young Canadian families, for middle-class Canadian families. And it is also one heck of an economic investment with a really powerful economic multiplier. Thanks.
As the leader of the Liberal Party, the person who's responsible for overall government policy, do you think balancing the budget matters? Eventually leading governments back to roughly balanced budget, does it matter?
I think it matters to be fiscally responsible. I think it matters to live within our means. But I think it also matters to be making the right investments so that future generations can prosper even more. To make sure that women can join the workforce with $10 a day childcare. To make sure that young people can actually afford to buy a new home, to build equity that will follow them through their lives and secure their retirement. To make sure that people can access the mental health services right across the country that people need in order to succeed in their workplace, in their lives. These are things that matter to Canadians, and they matter to us. That's why this is a plan that invests in Canadians and in their future. Because if there's one thing we learned during this pandemic, it's that being there for each other, having each other's backs, is not just the right thing to do, it's the smart thing to do. We made it through this pandemic from a health standpoint, but also from an economic standpoint, better than most other countries in the world. And taking what we learned about dealing with the pandemic and applying it to stepping up even further on the fight against climate change, on creating good jobs, on supporting Canadian families, on building a better future for everyone, that's the choice Canadians get to make in this election. And this election decides what we're doing now. Because we can't wait a year or 2 years for a government to make those decisions. The government has to make these decisions now, and Canadians deserve to make that choice now.
Prochaine question.
Bonjour, Monsieur Trudeau. Catherine Lévesque, La Presse canadienne. Je voulais poursuivre dans la lignée de mon collègue. Dans votre plateforme, on voit bel et bien que la seule source de revenus, c'est de taxer les banques, de taxer les plus riches. En comparaison, on a 3 fois plus là, de dépenses. Comment pouvez-vous parler d'un plan prudent et responsable alors qu'on se dirige fort probablement vers une crise économique?
Au contraire, oui. On a fait le choix d'en demander aux banques encore plus parce qu'ils ont très bien profité de cette pandémie et pendant que les petites entreprises et les familles ont fait des sacrifices, on s'attend à ce que les plus grandes banques fassent leur part aussi pour aider les familles. Donc oui, c'est quelque chose qu'on a fait. Mais on a aussi projeté des revenus confirmés par le directeur Parlement du budget en s'attaquant encore plus à l'évasion et l'évitement fiscal, par exemple, On a des mesures comme une taxe de luxe qu'on est en train de mettre pour s'assurer que ceux qui peuvent se permettre d'acheter des grands bateaux, des avions, payent un petit peu plus leur part. On va aussi s'assurer que les gens les plus riches payent au moins le taux d'imposition minimum que les moins riches doivent payer. C'est une question d'équité et de justice. Mais effectivement, on a fait le choix d'investir dans des choses comme 37 000 nouvelles places en garderie au Québec, 250 000 nouvelles places en garderie à travers le pays à 10 $ par jour, parce qu'on sait que ça crée de la croissance économique. C'est un exemple parfait de la différence entre la perspective de M. O'Toole. Ça coûte 30 milliards de dollars dans les prochaines années faire ces places en garderie à travers le pays. Lui préfère reprendre ce 30 milliards de dollars pour faire d'autres choses que d'investir, pour peut-être en retourner un petit peu aux familles. Mais ça ne crée pas de place. Ça laisse les familles mal prises, ça laisse les femmes à la maison en trop grand nombre. C'est un choix concret qu'on fait pour investir dans notre avenir parce qu'on sait que c'est ça qui amène la croissance dont on a besoin, pas juste pour les années à venir, mais pour les décennies à venir. Et je sais que les Canadiens sont d'accord parce qu'on a vu ce que les Canadiens ont pu faire les uns pour les autres pendant cette pandémie. De continuer d'être là les uns pour les autres, c'est la meilleure façon de créer une économie croissante avec des bons emplois de façon responsable pour tous.
En suivi?
Oui. Dans votre plateforme, donc on vient réintroduire, on promet de réintroduire beaucoup de projets de loi qui sont malheureusement morts au feuilleton lors du dernier Parlement, notamment le C10 sur la radiodiffusion, le contenu haineux en ligne, etc., la modernisation des lois sur les langues officielles. On se pose encore la question, pourquoi est-ce qu'on est en élection si de toute manière vous allez présenter les mêmes choses? Bien,
on a vu que même s'il y avait certains partis qui étaient d'accord avec nous, ces éléments importants sur lesquels on voulait avancer n'avançaient pas très vite. Mais effectivement, il y a des choses qu'on aurait pu continuer à forcer, à travailler très fort pour essayer de passer pendant cette session parlementaire qui venait. Mais ça ne reconnaît pas la réalité que sur les changements climatiques, sur le logement, sur les garderies, sur nos systèmes de santé et sur l'idée d'en finir avec cette pandémie une bonne fois pour toutes, on doit en faire bien plus que ce qu'on faisait même il y a quelques mois. Et c'est des décisions qui doivent se prendre maintenant. Pas dans 1 an, pas dans 2 ans où on est censé avoir encore une élection cédulée. On est déjà le Parlement minoritaire qui est le 5e plus long dans l'histoire du pays. Et on est dans une crise où les décisions importantes et énormes vont se prendre dans les mois à venir. Et les Canadiens méritent d'avoir leur mot à dire sur la direction que va prendre notre pays, parce que le choix est extrêmement clair. On recule dans la lutte contre les changements climatiques, on recule sur les garderies, les places pour les familles, on recule dans les investissements pour la santé mentale, on recule dans la lutte contre la pandémie maintenant, en évitant d'être clair sur les vaccins. Mais c'est ça qu'offre M. O'Toole et à un certain niveau M. Blanchette. Ou bien on a le choix d'avancer avec un plan ambitieux et concret pour toutes les choses dont les Canadiens vont avoir besoin dans les années à venir. C'est ce qu'on a établi dans notre plateforme.
Next question.
Glenn McGregor, CTV News. Mr. Trudeau, last election campaign, you campaigned on implementing a national pharmacare program. Since then, you've studied it, there's been lots of talk about it, but not a whole lot of substance has happened. In this document, barely a passing reference to it. Is national pharmacare still a priority for your government?
Yes, it is. We continue to believe that a national pharmacare program is the right path forward for the country. We also, as we always do, recognize how important it is to work with the province and territories on issues in their jurisdiction. So even as we were very much concentrated on the pandemic, during the past 18 months. We continued to work with willing partners on pharmacare, and we actually have signed a model for the pharmacare path we want to take nationally with the province of Prince Edward Island, under a Conservative government, no less. We are there because we know that increasingly healthcare will be delivered through more and more sophisticated pharmaceuticals, less by institutions, less by surgical interventions and treatments. These are the things we know we need to be there for. We've been there concretely with a strategy on high-cost drugs for rare diseases. We've been there specifically to lower the cost of prescription drugs for Canadians over the past number of years, and we will continue to make sure nobody in this country has to choose between paying for groceries or paying for the medications that keeps them safe and healthy.
Following up.
We haven't had an abortion law in this country since 1988 when the Supreme Court of Canada struck it down. You're now proposing to bring one back through regulation, though, and which, as you know, regulations don't require Parliament to act on them. You could do them through order in council. If it is abortion in this country is really a settled issue, as you believe it is, why not do it through an amendment to the Canada Health Act, bring it to Parliament, and let Parliament decide if it is a settled issue?
When people talk about the fact that there is a legal vacuum around abortion, that's not entirely true. It's that as a country, we rely on our health professionals and doctors to ensure choice and safety of mothers of women across the country. The Canadian Medical Association, the doctors' organizations across the country have very clear expectations and rules around access to abortion that is based on healthcare principles and not ideological principles like so many who want us to reverse the position of women being able to choose what happens with their own bodies.
Thank you. We'll take one last question and follow up.
Nous avons un pays dans lequel c'est les médecins et c'est les associations médicales qui établissent, en concertation, en partenariat avec d'autres, les règles et les principes par lesquels les femmes peuvent avoir accès aux avortements de façon sécuritaire. Et nous, en tant que gouvernement, nous allons continuer de nous assurer que des femmes de partout au pays aient accès à ces services-là. C'est ce que la grande majorité des Canadiens s'attendent de leur gouvernement et c'est ce qu'on va livrer.
Thank you. We'll take one last question, one follow-up.
Good morning, Richard Warnica from the Toronto Star. We've lived through and are still living through the greatest public health crisis in generations, but the platform, as far as I can tell, has very little to say about the structural gaps and flaws in the national public health infrastructure that the pandemic exposed, whether that's pandemic preparedness, pre-pandemic warning, national lab capacity, border protections, federal-provincial cooperation. Why is there so little to say about preventing the next crisis like this?
I think we've been very, very clear that there are many, many lessons to learn from this pandemic to put in place for the future, which is why, for example, we've been investing to establish a Canadian vaccine production industry with Moderna, with other investments across the country. We will be ready to be able to respond to future pandemics. And yes, how we predict them, how we respond quickly to them, there's lots to learn on that. And we have been clear about doing that. But we're still fighting this pandemic right now. We're still making sure that people who've done their part and gotten vaccinated are able to get through and get back to as much of a normal life as possible on planes or trains without worrying that their kids are going to be sitting across the aisle from someone who's unvaccinated and putting them at risk. Making sure workplaces can keep themselves and their employees safe. Making sure that businesses that choose to move forward with vaccination requirements aren't subject to unnecessary or unjustified lawsuits. Making sure that we're partnering and paying for vaccine passports in provinces that want to ensure that the people who get to use non-essential services are the ones who've done the right things to protect themselves and their loved ones. This is how we end this pandemic, and this is what we've been unequivocal on, and all the while we have learned the lessons of this pandemic on how vulnerable our seniors are and how much more we need to do, which is why we're going to be hiring 50,000 personal support workers over the coming years, and making sure they're paid at least $25 an hour. These are the kinds of things we have responded to because of the crisis of this pandemic, and there's more to do.
Following up.
Good morning, Mr. Trudeau. Prabjot Sohal from Red FM. In Cambridge, when protesters tried to interrupt your campaign, you talked about compassion because the pandemic has been hard on people. In Sudbury, you came out very strong against the same protesters. What changed in your campaign between Cambridge and Sudbury?
Well, first of all, I will not be responding to anger with anger. That's not what Canadians want, and that's not what Canadians expect from their leaders. But yesterday morning, I walked my 7-year-old to school. It was grade 2. He had been super excited about grade 1, because that was, first year of real big boy school. But grade 1 was mostly virtual. And as I saw him, running to catch up with their friends, all wearing little masks, excited about finding out that he was in the same class as Sacha and Felix, it came to me that I really, really don't want our kids to have to go through more virtual schools. I don't want to have to go through lockdowns in this country once again, when close to 80% of Canadians have done the right thing, not just for themselves, but for their loved ones. Have stepped up, wore masks, stayed home, kept their distances, washed their hands 25 times a day, and got vaccinated. And my job as leader right now is to make sure we are protecting Canadians. And that means making sure that the people who've done the right things can get back on a plane or train without being worried that they're exposing themselves or their kids who can't yet get vaccinated to COVID-19. That we're doing more to ensure workplaces and non-essential services are safe for people who chose to get vaccinated or people who can't get vaccinated. I will continue to be steadfast and unequivocal, unlike some of the other leaders, on the way we get through this pandemic. And it's not just to be happier and safer for our kids. It's because all the other things we need to do to fight against climate change, to grow the economy, to create good jobs, to support vulnerable people, we only really get to do them if we end this pandemic for good. That's why I have little patience for people who choose to put themselves, their kids, and the rest of us at greater risk.
En français.
Ce que j'avais dit à Cambridge, c'était une promesse que j'allais pas affronter la colère avec de la colère moi-même. C'est pas ça ce que les gens veulent. Mais hier matin, j'ai amené mon fils mon fils Adrien, à sa première journée d'école, en 2e année. Puis la première année, ça avait été pas mal plate pour lui, surtout virtuel, pas du tout sa première année à la vraie école comme il s'y attendait. Et pendant que je le regardais rejoindre ses amis et être super content de se retrouver dans la même classe qu'eux, tous en portant des masques, je me suis rendu compte que ça ne me tente vraiment pas qu'il y ait à retourner en classe virtuelle. Ça ne me tente vraiment pas qu'on doive revenir en confinement en tant que pays, surtout que presque 80% des Canadiens sont en train de faire la bonne chose, de se faire vacciner pour se protéger soi-même et pour protéger nos enfants et les gens vulnérables. Donc oui, je vais rester sans équivoque dans notre besoin de passer à travers par la vaccination pour ne pas mettre les gens à risque quand ils vont au gym, quand ils vont dans un avion, quand ils vont au restaurant, quand ils choisissent de revenir un petit peu plus à la normale, comme on veut tous, à cause de certains qui choisissent de ne pas se faire vacciner. Je n'ai pas de patience pour ces gens-là. Moi, ma job, c'est de garder les Canadiens en sécurité et c'est exactement ce que je vais faire.
Merci beaucoup. C'est ce qui m'a fait la conférence de presse d'aujourd'hui.
Merci tout le monde.